Before I tell you this story, I want you to do me a favor. Think about the most important lesson you ever learned. Was it about kindness? About hard work? Mine was about consequences. And I taught it to my son and his wife in a way they will never, ever forget. I'm speaking to you today from a place of peace, but it was born from a moment of profound betrayal. It started on a trip I paid for, in a car I owned, with a phone call that changed everything. My son was sitting right next to me, smiling, completely unaware that in that single moment, I had decided to dismantle his entire world. I hope you'll stick around to hear how it all unfolded. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love to see how far these stories travel. The air in the convertible was crisp, smelling of pine and distant rain as we wound our way up the coastal highway. It was a father-son trip, something I had suggested to my son, Mark, to reconnect. Or, at least, that's what I told him. In truth, I felt him slipping away, becoming more and more a reflection of his materialistic and endlessly dissatisfied wife, Jessica. At 42, Mark still hadn't quite found his footing. He'd drifted from one business idea to the next, each one funded by me, each one fading quietly into obscurity after the initial excitement wore off. He wasn't a bad person, not in his core, but he was weak, easily swayed, and had grown accustomed to a life he hadn't earned, a life I had provided. The car was a vintage Mercedes, a machine I had lovingly restored myself. Mark drove, his hands resting lightly on the wheel, an expensive watch I'd bought him for his 40th birthday glinting in the sun. He was complaining. The hotel I'd booked, a 5-star resort with ocean views, apparently had slow room service. The Michelin star restaurant we had reservations at was a bit stuffy. I just nodded, listening to the hum of the engine and the soft complaints of a man who had never known a day of real struggle. I had built a construction empire from dust and calloused hands, working 16-hour days so my son would never have to. I had sold the company a decade ago for a sum that would ensure my family's comfort for generations. I lived modestly, in the same comfortable but unassuming house I'd bought 30 years prior. Mark and Jessica, however, lived in a sprawling mansion in a gated community, drove luxury SUVs, and took multiple international vacations a year. It was all funded by me. The house was in my name. The cars were leased through a holding company I owned. Their lavish lifestyle was fueled by a generous monthly allowance transferred from a trust one controlled. They knew I was well off, but they had no concept of the scale, nor the ironclad control I maintained over every single asset. They saw me as a simple, aging father, a walking wallet. They mistook my generosity for foolishness. My phone buzzed in the center console. I glanced at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from back home. "Go ahead, Dad, get it," Mark said, a hint of impatience in his voice. He was probably eager to get back to texting Jessica. I answered, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear over the wind. "Hello." A woman's voice, professional and a little hesitant, came through. "Hello. Am I speaking with Mr. Henderson?" "This is he," I replied. "Sir, my name is Brenda, from the office of Dr. Alistair Finch. I'm calling to confirm your appointment for this Friday." I frowned. "I'm sorry. I think you have a wrong number. I don't have an appointment with a Dr. Finch." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I saw his knuckles go white on the steering wheel. "Oh," the receptionist said, sounding flustered. "My apologies. The appointment was made on your behalf by a Mark and Jessica Henderson. It's for a competency evaluation." The world went silent. The roar of the engine, the rush of the wind, the cry of a distant gull, it all vanished. There was only the woman's voice, hanging in the air between me and my son. A competency evaluation. The words echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. They weren't just taking my money. They were trying to take my mind, my identity, my very freedom. They were laying the groundwork to have me declared unfit, to seize control of the assets they so desperately craved, and likely to place me in a home where I would be out of sight and out of mind. Also, their endless stream of cash would be uninterrupted. Mark was staring straight ahead, his face a pale, frozen mask of guilt. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was a confession. The receptionist, sensing the catastrophic tension, stammered an apology and hung up. I calmly reached over and turned off the speakerphone. I placed the phone back in the console. The world outside the windshield didn't change. The sun was still bright. The ocean was still a brilliant blue. The trees still lined the road in majestic rows. But inside me, a glacier had formed. The hurt was immense, a physical blow to my chest that took my breath away. This was my son, my boy, whom I had taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose future I had secured with my own sweat and sacrifice. And he was trying to steal my life from me. The sadness was a deep, cold ocean. But as we drove on in that deafening silence, something else began to rise from those depths. It was cold, hard, and sharp. It was resolve. The emotional father, the doting patriarch, the man who excused his son's weakness and his daughter-in-law's greed, died on that coastal highway. In his place sat a businessman, a strategist, a man who had built an empire by seeing the world in terms of assets and liabilities, strengths and weaknesses. And my son had just declared himself a liability. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice trembling. "Dad, we can explain." I held up a hand, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Drive," I said. My voice was unervingly calm, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't the voice of a hurt father. It was the voice of a CEO about to liquidate a failing division. "Just drive." Mark, he flinched at the tone and said no more. For the next 3 hours, we drove back to the resort in complete silence. He was sweating, terrified. I was calculating. I was planning. Every act of disrespect, every ungrateful comment, every casual display of entitlement from the past 10 years played through my mind, not as a painful memory, but as a data point in a long and damning file. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness. Their belief that I was a simple old man was the leverage I needed. They had started a war, not realizing their entire kingdom was built on my land. With my resources, it could be unmade with a single command from me. By the time we pulled into the hotel parking lot, the plan was fully formed. It would be methodical. It would be devastating. And it would be entirely legal. It would be, in a word, justice. The rest of the trip was a hollow pantomime. I was polite, distant, a ghost at the dinner table. Mark was a nervous wreck, trying to find a moment to give his pathetic, pre-rehearsed explanation. I gave him no such opening. When we returned home, I told him I needed some time to think. He and Jessica looked relieved, foolishly believing that time to think meant I might forgive and forget. They thought they had time. They were wrong. The very next morning, I was in the office of my lawyer, Arthur Vance. Arthur was more than my lawyer. He was a friend of 40 years, a man as sharp as a razor and as loyal as a hound. He'd helped me structure my estate years ago with precisely this kind of scenario in mind, a contingency against greed and betrayal. "Protect yourself first, James," he'd always said. "Family is family, but money makes people forget who they are." How right he was. I sat across from his large mahogany desk and laid it all out. The trip, the phone call, the look on Mark's face. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression hardening from one of friendly concern to cold fury. When I was finished, he simply nodded. "So, James, the rainy day protocol, is it?" "The whole damn storm, Arthur," I said. "Liquidation. Total and complete for the next 2 hours." We went over the architecture of a life I had built for my son. It was a fortress, and I held every key. First, the house. The sprawling 6-bedroom mansion Mark and Jessica called home was held in a revocable living trust. I was the sole trustee. My signature was all that was required to dissolve Mark's beneficiary status and reclaim the property. Arthur printed out the document. "The eviction notice will give them 30 days, as required by law," he said. "It will be served tomorrow," I nodded. 30 days of panic. Perfect. Next, the income. The generous 6-figure annual allowance they received was a discretionary distribution from that same trust. It wasn't an entitlement. It was a gift I chose to give each month. Arthur pulled up the trust bylaws on his monitor and highlighted the relevant clause. With a simple written directive to the bank managing the trust, I could cease all payments immediately. "When do you want to cut it off?" Arthur asked. Today, I said. I want their next automatic transfer to fail. Arthur smiled grimly. Consider it done. Then the toys. The two luxury SUVs they drove were leased by my private holding company and listed as executive perks for Mark, who held a vice president title in a company that hadn't been active in 5 years. It was a sham, a way for me to provide for him tax efficiently. We contacted the leasing company. Per the terms of our corporate contract, we could terminate the leases at any time. The repossession orders were filed. They would be picked up within 48 hours. The credit cards, the platinum, no-limit cards they use for everything from groceries to designer clothes, were also corporate cards linked to the same defunct company. A single phone call to the bank's corporate accounts manager was all it took. Cancel cards 7-3-4-4 and 7-3-4-5. Effective immediately, I instructed. The manager didn't ask questions. Finally, the most poetic piece of the puzzle, Jessica's boutique. She was so proud of her little shop, a vanity project where she sold overpriced clothing to her wealthy friends. She saw herself as a savvy businesswoman. The reality was that I had funded the entire venture. She thought it was a gift. It wasn't. It was a business loan from my holding company, secured by the business itself. The loan agreement, drafted by Arthur, contained a standard but rarely used demand clause. It meant I could demand full repayment of the outstanding $500,000 at any time, for any reason. It's time to call on the loan, Arthur, I said. Arthur's pen flew across a legal pad. The letter will go out to her business address by courier this afternoon. She'll have 10 business days to remit the full amount. When she can't, the company, your company, will seize all assets. The inventory, the fixtures, the bank account. Everything. I sat back. In the space of 2 hours, we had drafted the legal orders to completely and utterly dismantle their life. Every pillar of their comfortable existence, their home, their income, their transportation, their status, was set to be demolished, all with a few signatures and phone calls. It was a clean, quiet, corporate execution. The first call came 2 days later. It was Jessica. Her voice was a shrill mix of confusion and indignation. James, my business card was declined when I tried to pay a supplier. It was so embarrassing. You need to call the bank and fix this. I feigned concern. Oh dear, that's very strange. Jessica, I'm sure it's just a technical glitch. You should give the bank a call yourself and see what's going on. There was a pause. She was expecting me to fix it, as I always did. Well, can't you just handle it? She snapped. I'm busy. I'm afraid I'm quite busy myself, I said calmly. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I hung up. I imagined her staring at her phone in disbelief. It was the first time in her life I had ever told her no. The next call was from Mark that evening. Dad, we tried to go out for dinner, and all our cards were declined. All of them. What is happening? His voice was laced with a panic he was trying to conceal. The bank must be having some major issues, son, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. A system-wide failure, perhaps. Very inconvenient. Did you have cash? Cash? Dad, who carries cash? He scoffed, the ingrained entitlement momentarily overriding his fear. Well, I said, that does present a problem. I offered no solution. No offer to transfer money. Nothing. Just a calm acknowledgement of his problem. The silence on his end was heavy with dawning horror. This wasn't a glitch. The following day was the big one. I was sitting on my porch, drinking a cup of tea, when my phone rang. It was Jessica again, and this time she was screaming. A tow truck is here. James, a tow truck is taking my car. They said the lease was terminated. You have to stop them. I could hear the guttural roar of the truck's engine in the background. Terminated? I said, feigning shock. My goodness. There must be some terrible mistake with the paperwork at the company. I'll have to look into that on Monday, she shrieked. They're hooking it up right now. Do something. Jessica, it's Saturday. The corporate offices are closed. There's nothing I can do until the work week begins, I said smoothly, taking a serene sip of my tea. You'll have to find another way to get around for now. An hour later, a second, nearly identical call came from Mark. His SUV had been towed from the golf course parking lot. The humiliation in his voice was thick enough to taste. But the true masterpiece of the plan arrived on their doorstep that afternoon. It was a large manila envelope delivered by a court-appointed server. I knew exactly what it was. I waited. The call came at 5:17 p.m. It was Mark. He wasn't panicked anymore. He was weeping. "Dad, we got a letter. An eviction notice. It says we have 30 days to vacate the house. Dad, this is our home. This has to be a mistake. Please, Dad, tell me this is a mistake." "It's not a mistake, Mark," I said, my voice finally dropping the pretense. It was flat, cold, and final. "It's my house. It has always been my house, but—" "Why?" he choked out. "We need to talk," I said. "Come to my house. My real house. And bring Jessica." They arrive an hour later, not in a luxury SUV, but in a taxi. They looked disheveled and broken. Jessica's face was tear-stained, her usual mask of haughty confidence shattered. Mark looked like a boy who had just been told his entire world was a lie. They stood in my modest living room, a room they had always condescended to, calling it quaint and cramped. Today, it looked like a palace to them. I let them stand in silence for a long moment, forcing them to absorb the shift in power. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa. They sat. I remained standing, looking down at them. "You wanted to know why?" I began, my voice calm and measured. "The answer is simple. It's a lesson. A lesson you are long overdue to learn. It's a lesson about consequences." I walked over to my desk and picked up a file. I opened it and took out a single sheet of paper. It was a transcript of the phone call from Dr. Finch's office, which I had requested from my phone provider. I placed it on a coffee table in front of them. "It started with this," I said. "A phone call confirming an appointment for a competency evaluation. An appointment you made for me, behind my back." Jessica gasped and looked at Mark, her eyes wide with terror. Mark couldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "You live in a $6 million house," I continued, my voice low and steady. "My house. You wanted to put its owner in a care facility and have him declared mentally incompetent so you could control his assets. So, as a consequence, you can no longer live in my house." Jessica started to cry, a pathetic gulping sound. "You drive $100,000 cars that my company pays for. You use those cars to drive to meetings with doctors and, I presume, lawyers to betray me. So, as a consequence, you can no longer drive my cars." Mark finally looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and confusion. "Dad, it wasn't like that." Jessica thought. "We were just worried about you." "Don't," I said, my voice sharp enough to make him flinch. "Do not insult my intelligence by lying to me now. Not after all this." I went on, methodically connecting every action I took to a specific failing on their part. "You spend thousands of dollars a month on my credit cards, buying things you don't need to impress people you don't like. You never once said thank you. Not for the money, not for the house, not for the life I gave you. You treated it as your right. So, as a consequence, you no longer have my money to spend." I then turned to Jessica, who was now openly sobbing. "And you, Jessica, your boutique. You paraded yourself as a successful entrepreneur, but you never made a profit. Your business was a hobby funded by a loan from me. A loan you never made a single payment on. You used that business as a platform to complain about your simple father-in-law to your friends. I have it on good authority. So, as a consequence, I have called in that loan. The business and all its assets are now forfeit to repay the debt. You are not a businesswoman. You are unemployed. I'll let the weight of it all settle in the room." The full, comprehensive destruction of their world laid bare. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the profound disrespect, the utter lack of gratitude, the chilling, entitled belief that they could just dispose of me when I became an inconvenience. "You see," I said, my voice softening slightly, not with pity, but with the quiet finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "You thought I was just a foolish old man, an open wallet. You never bothered to know the man who filled that wallet. You never understood that the same mind that built an empire from nothing could also dismantle a parasitic fantasy with a few phone calls. You mistook my kindness for weakness. That was your fatal mistake." They had nothing to say. There were no more lies, no more excuses. They just sat there, broken by the truth. "You have 27 days left in the house," I said. I suggest you use that time to find jobs in a small apartment you can actually afford. The trust is sealed. The companies are being dissolved. The umbilical cord is cut. From now on, you are on your own. I walked to the front door and opened it. Your taxi is waiting. They stumbled out into the night. Two spoiled children suddenly thrust into the cold, hard world of adulthood. In the months that followed, I heard through the grapevine about their new life. Mark got a job as a sales associate at a mid-range car dealership. Jessica was working as a cashier at a high-end grocery store. They live in a two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. They're learning, slowly and painfully, the value of a dollar they had to earn themselves. I take no joy in their struggle, but I feel a profound sense of justice, of peace. My life is quiet now, and it is my own. I travel, I work on my cars, I spend time with friends who value me for who I am, not for what I have. I have reestablished what was always true. This is my house. This is my life. And my kindness is a gift, not an obligation. The lesson was harsh, but necessary. Actions have consequences. And for anyone out there who feels taken for granted, who feels their kindness is being mistaken for weakness, remember this. You are the architect of your life. You hold the plans, and you should never, ever be afraid to evict tenants who don't respect the property. Thank you for listening to my story. Please share your own thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.